Slavery is back.
Welcome to a place where private business profit from a captive labour force, yet pennies are spent on medical services to a population in which the Indigenous, the poor and the mentally ill are overrepresented. Where isolation, humiliation and degradation are facts of life. Welcome to prison.
It depends who's telling the story, I suppose. The prisoners would have one view, the people who work in the prison system would have another, and I think it's up to people to decide where the truth is.
Give government propaganda and the media spin doctors the flick. And check out Doin' Time for news, views and tunes on prison issues from Guantanamo Bay to Christmas Island to prisons and detention centres everywhere. Every Monday at 4 p.m. on your community radio 3CR.
We are still fired up and we're still talking about revolution.
Hello and welcome to the Doin' Time show. This is 3CR Community Radio, 855 AM on the dial, streaming live on www.3cr.org.au. This is Marisa and I'll be taking you through until 5 o'clock this evening. First up on the show, we're going to be speaking with Tiffany Overall from Youthlaw, and we'll be speaking to her about a topic that we have interviewed on many, many times over many years. And in collaboration with the Human Rights Law Centre, health and medical experts call for the age of criminal responsibility to be raised to at least 14. Leading health and medical organisations in Australia say they will not stop pushing for the law to reflect medical science and for governments to raise the age of criminal responsibility to at least 14. And this is actually a little bit of a blurb that I've read out from a recent media release put out by the Human Rights Law Centre. And we've recently also interviewed the Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service, some people from there. In particular, we interviewed Leanne, who is the leader of the statewide Deaths in Custody Notification Service. So we'll be speaking with Tiffany pretty soon, and then after that, I'm hoping to be interviewing Auntie Caroline, who is a First Nations protector of country, and we're hoping to interview her about the 1980s and the Aboriginal Tent Embassy that she was involved in, looking at a little bit of history and perhaps also looking at what's happening with coal at the moment and looking at the issues around that. But first up, we'll be speaking with Tiffany very shortly.
Get your Radical summer attire sorted. New stock of 3CR Radical Radio tees has just landed, featuring the iconic antenna design by artist Emily Floyd. As well as our basic black, we have a range of great pastel and primary colours in a variety of sizes. And for those radical little people, we have a short run of kids' tees available too. For just $30 for adults or $20 for kids, you can get yourself a local, ethically manufactured and printed tee that supports Radical Community Radio. We can send one out in the post, and there's click and collect from our studios at 21 Smith Street, Fitzroy. Or if you're fully vaxxed, you can drop in and browse our t-shirt rack during business hours. To purchase online, go to 3cr.org.au/shop.
And you're back with the Doin' Time show. I'd like to welcome Tiffany to the program. Hello, Tiffany. How are you towards the end of the year?
Yeah. Hi, Marisa. I'm really well, thank you. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's been a tough year with the pandemic and been a bit crazy. So Australia has become internationally isolated in its refusal to raise the age from 10 to 14. And in fact, Attorneys General last month said that they would consider raising the age to 12. Can you talk to us a little bit about what's happening at Youthlaw and in regards to this and what's going on there?
Yeah,
and I believe
absolutely.
you also didn't give evidence, but you were part of an evidence-based inquiry, weren't you, earlier on this year?
Yeah, so in terms of raise the age, there was a whole heap of organisations, including Youthlaw, that put submissions into a national review of looking at, potentially changing the age. And that process has been going on for some time. That sort of process of gathering submissions finished off ages ago, and we were hoping to see the national group of Attorney Generals release the findings of that review, and because we were pretty confident there was a lot of submissions collectively calling to raise the age to 14 at a minimum. And unfortunately, despite absolute amazing efforts from the likes of the Human Rights Law Centre and others, we haven't been able to get a copy of that report. We haven't been able to publicly see all the submissions, sadly. So it's been a real shutdown of and really very limited transparency of what that review sort of showed. And then separate to that, we know that, like as you said, when you introduced the session last month, there was a meeting of the group of Attorney Generals coming together, and they were basically saying, well, look, we're going to look into a proposal to raise the age of criminal responsibility to 12. So it's like a plan to look at a proposal. So it's no commitment to anything, but it also talks about 12 years, and not even though all the evidence, all the submissions from a whole heap of agencies have been saying it needs to be at least 14. So it's a little bit frustrating, a little bit disappointing. Attorney General's been, promising to develop something in this space for the last 3 years, and yet they've delivered absolutely nothing. And, meanwhile, kids across Australia continue to be, under 14, continue to be arrested and locked away. So there's been a fair bit of advocacy and work flowing from that announcement last month. Again, as you flagged, there's a heap of medicos and medical agencies that have come together basically saying that, it's really disappointing that the announcement last month is only talking about possibly raising the age to 12 and not 14. They're reminding the government really strongly across all the states and territories that 12 is just contrary to all the best legal and health advice. That it all says that 14 years old is the absolute youngest age a child should ever be subjected to the criminal legal system. I think it's just, if anything, it's just ramped us up again. We've really got to push for more urgent action around it. Age being raised to 14 at a minimum. So,
it really is quite astounding, because there's going to be there's already quite a lot of mass imprisonment.
Yeah, that's right. We definitely see, there's been a big spike in numbers of imprisonment across all ages. In the children's space, in the sort of under 14 space, there are considerable numbers still. It's not comparatively high as for adults, but for example, we know, for a period of, I think it was probably up till middle of last year, there were about 400 and just under 500 children under 14 in prison across the nation at that time. And the irony is, Marisa, that if Australia raised the age to 12 at that point in time, then there would have still been 456 out of 499 of the kids would still have been in prison. It was such a small amount under 12, you know what I mean? So it's almost like they were just picking the low fruit and going, oh, well, we'll give them something, but it won't actually impact on many kids. It won't save many kids hitting the system or being, locked up. So that's also really disappointing,
It's extremely disappointing, and in particular what's also disappointing, and I remember that I interviewed Monique Hurley and also Amala as well from the Human Rights Law Centre. And I think it might have been back in October, and I think you were on the same show as well. Mm-hmm. Excuse me. And it was just, I think, after the day that Monique and Amala gave evidence in for the parliamentary inquiry.
Yes. So that was the Victorian inquiry, that's right, on the criminal justice system more broadly. Yep.
Yeah, so the Victorian inquiry into the criminal justice system more broadly obviously looked at everything like, mass imprisonment, but I believe they also looked at the criminal age as well, raising the criminal age.
Brought up by many, many people, including Human Rights Law Centre and ourselves, absolutely. And
they're meant to be reporting back in February, but don't you find it interesting that there's no report? That's just it's not accountable.
Look, I think. They're two separate. I was referring to another national review specifically on raising the age. So that's the one we can't get our hands on. Yeah, that's the one we can't get our hands on. But,
you can't get your hands on that report.
The national one. And it's sort of at the national level that they came out with this announcement of 12 years. So, look, on a Victorian level, who knows, let's be, I don't know, a little upbeat and try to be positive. Maybe with this Victorian review of the criminal justice system, they may make a recommendation to the Victorian government, yes, we should be raising the age to 14. And so I think that's still quite possible. We'll have a better idea in February when the report comes out. But, and that's the thing now. I think we have to just say here as Victorians, like, we want it to happen nationally, but, in Victoria, let's take a lead on this. ACT are going alone. They're the only one that's taken any action in line with all the expert advice, and they have committed to raising the age to 14. And they have pushed back on this national call and said, no, we don't agree with that. We're still going to go ahead ourselves and raise the age to 14. And so we really need Victoria to just be, a bit more courageous and show some leadership and go, all right, we agree with ACT. Yes, we're going to do this too. If the other jurisdictions aren't ready for it, well, so be it. But, we've done a lot of thinking and a lot of talking. We've done this, we've got this parliamentary review. We've got all the medical evidence. Let's do it.
So just so that let's clarify then, just to clear up any confusion that I might have caused actually.
No, you're right.
No, but I just want to kind of just so you can just mention both of these inquiries now, just so to put it in context.
Yeah, sure. So there was a national review into the age of criminal responsibility that was done nationally, and that was really done to inform all the AGs across the nation about how they should proceed in this space. So that was the Coalition of Attorney Generals, and so that was done a couple of years ago, and that's what we've been calling on to get a copy of whatever recommendations were made in that report, but they've kept it all, they're saying it's all internal, they're not prepared to release it publicly. But then separately, most recently, when all the National Attorney Generals came together, they're the ones that have come out and said that they made this announcement to plan a proposal to raise the age to 12 years, even though they've got all of that evidence that's part of that review at their fingertips, which I'm sure suggests they should be doing something else and going that bit further. So that's the national process. And then separately, and just this year, we've had this parliamentary review broadly into the criminal justice system, which is very much looking at that issue you raised about the increasing number of prisoners, the spike in recidivism numbers, etc. And it was really exploring across the board, what can we be doing to bring those numbers down to, reduce recidivism? And in the mix of all the very appropriate recommendations made, raising the age of criminal responsibility was one of the foundation sort of recommendations. A lot of people that put into that Victorian review were saying, hey, this is a really important step to stop the trajectory of these young people into the system and then staying in the system as adults, because that's what we know often can happen. So the two separate processes. Yeah.
Thank you so much they're both relevant, actually.
Absolutely. There's been, just a lot going on in this space. So we it's really interesting. I mean, I actually feel like here in Victoria, there's a lot of political support for this, idea of raising the age of criminal responsibility. But I don't know, it's just them feeling emboldened and having the courage and the license to go ahead and make that change. I really don't think it needs to be such a big deal. Like, we're not talking about an enormous cohort of children. I feel like Victoria, we have the services, we have the infrastructure, we have the know-how to wrap around some of these young people hitting the system under 14, and providing a welfare and health response rather than a criminal justice response. I really think we are capable of it, and other countries have done it successfully. Victoria and Australia can do it successfully as well.
Absolutely. And in fact, even though other countries do have their flaws, I mean, specifically, roughly, what would be an example of a country where it was successful?
Look, I think it's quite a few jurisdictions doing it at the moment, but I'm trying to think what would be sort of a standout. I'm not super well researched in the space of how
That's okay.
Yeah.
No, but it's enough to say, isn't it, Tiffany? I mean, we don't have to specify. This is only just a general interview, but it's enough to say that overseas, like Australia, is backward.
That's right. Some jurisdictions have gone higher than 14. Some of the Scandinavian countries have gone as high as 16. So, we could be pushing for higher again, but, we're like, well, no, I think, we've got enough to suggest that at the absolute minimum, 14.
And, of course, our Aboriginal children are severely impacted.
Yes, they are. And look, I have to say, a lot of the Aboriginal-led organisations have been champions in this space, and that they are really leading the way with the advocacy in this call for raising the age, because they know how crucial this reform is for a lot of the young folk. So there's been calls for it from the Aboriginal Children's Commissioner within the Children's Commission. There's been calls for it from VALS, obviously, from VATCHO, from a whole heap of organisations. So, let's hope that can get over the line.
Absolutely. And just finally, with Youthlaw, what's happened with the work of Youthlaw in terms of working with children who may go to prison? Is that something that is looked at, or is it more about policy?
Yeah, it's a little bit more about policy. Main reason being, I suppose, at Youthlaw, while we do have a criminal law practice supporting children and young people, we sort of have this cut-off point. If the offending is serious enough to potentially get a sentence of detention, that's when it sort of slips into Victoria Legal Aid's space. So they're sort of resourced to do that casework, so they do a lot of that work in detention with young people. All Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service do as well. So Youthlaw will assist with less serious criminal matters. But I suppose it's still really relevant for us because, when we talk about raising the age of criminal responsibility, we're saying you shouldn't be arresting or charging a child under 14. So yes, we're definitely getting children under 14 charged with offences that may not result in them, ending up spending time in detention. But we would say that wasn't the appropriate response. So why would you necessarily charge or arrest, a child for, stealing something? Why would you necessarily have a criminal response when obviously there's other stuff going on, and we could provide a welfare and health response to address those issues underlying that particular young person's offending behaviour. So it is relevant for us in that way, and we don't see a whole lot of kids under 14, but we do definitely see some.
Of course. And we really need to be reminded, and I know this is going to sound really harsh, but we need to be reminded that Australia is a penal system. That's how it was founded. It was founded by colonisation, dispossession, genocide, and convict settlement.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And so it's breaking, very long, tradition and culture, isn't it, for us to do things differently. And I'm not sure if that's some of the reticence to change, but I mean, I think we just all have to acknowledge how culturally embedded our current practice is.
Well, isn't Australia based on the Westminster system? The British?
It is. Yeah, it is British. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Food for thought, huh? Tiffany, thank you so much for coming onto the program.
No, my pleasure as always, Marisa. Thanks for having me.
Lovely to have you. It's the end of the year now.
Yep.
And in fact, just to let yourself know and also listeners that we're going to be playing some highlights over the summer programming. The 20th of December will be my last show for the year, and look out for some just some highlights from the year, and there's going to be like a series on this very topic about criminal age.
Oh, brilliant. No, good on you. And, just thanks for all your, passion and persistence during the year. It's been much appreciated, and, I hope you have a well-deserved break when you get to it.
You too, Tiffany. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you. All right.
Take care.
Cheers. See
Bye-bye.
ya. Bye.
You're listening to 3CR Community Radio 855 AM. Visit the 3CR website at 3cr.org.au/podcast to hear the most recent recording from each show, or 3cr.org.au/streaming to listen live.
"20 Years on the Inside" is an iconic new podcast series that gives voice to the experience of First Nations people in the Victorian prison system.
20 Years on the Inside. I'm Vicky Roach.
And I'm Kutcher Edwards. This series reflects on 20 years of listening to our mobs on the inside as part of the Beyond the Bars prison broadcasts.
20 Years on the Inside is essential listening for anyone looking to educate themselves about the realities of life on the inside and the need to end Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander incarceration.
Well, a lot of the boys mentioned about being in jail. What you do really isn't who you are. It's how you love your family, it's how you care about your cousins, and it's how you care about your people. That's what this is about for me.
Catch the podcast via the 3CR website or on your favourite podcast app.
Across Australia and around the world, we have seen reactionary right-wing mobilisations around anti-vaccine, anti-lockdown and anti-public health demands. In response to this, the Campaign Against Racism and Fascism have launched the campaign Pro-Vax, Pro-Union, Anti-Fascist to combat the far right and to fight for public health, safety and social solidarity. Go to www.carf.melbourne to join the fight for the safety of workers in the community and against the far right.
A 3CR supporter.
And this is the Doing Time show. And just to let listeners know that unfortunately we couldn't get on to Auntie Carolyn, so I'm hoping we can get her on possibly next week or maybe next year. We're kind of, getting to a close of the year now, so I'm going to actually read out an article in regards to an interview that the show did last week, I believe, in regards to Paddy Gibson, because it is important to talk about what's happening with the far right and what's going on in terms of activists and people that are into human rights being intimidated. And this particular article was written by Sydney criminal lawyers by Paul Gregoire. And it's entitled An Interview with the Jumbunna Institute's Paddy Gibson, Neo-Nazis Intimidate Anti-Racist Activist at Home. And this article was written about a week ago now, and I'll begin now. Anti-racism activist, well-respected anti-racism activist, supporter of First Nations rights and prominent trade unionist, Paddy Gibson, had three neo-Nazi types with shaven heads and shirts emblazoned with the Eureka flag turn up on his front doorstep on the night of Saturday last week, the 4th of December. The unexpected and uninvited visitors banged on his front door, calling out that they wanted to speak to him. The three men soon commenced bashing on the door of his Sydney home, ripping at security screens, and even broke a window. Gibson has since explained that he has been the subject of death threats in the past. This was especially so last year during the height of the Black Lives Matter protests in Sydney, and he's added that he welcomed the support that his multicultural neighbourhood has shown since the incident. A member of socialist group Solidarity, Paddy is a key figure on the local social justice movement scene. He's also a researcher at the UTS Jumbunna Institute, where he works under esteemed Professor Larissa Behendt, and that's spelled Behrendt. And his work at the uni directly deals with Aboriginal deaths in custody. This is a line in the sand that should never be crossed in politics, with extremist right-wing thugs threatening the home of a prominent anti-racist activist, said New South Wales Greens MLC David Shoebridge on the day following the incident. When politicians from the Prime Minister down provide cover for the far right, then this creates a political space for violence. National Justice Project Director George Newhouse outlined that the attack was a result of governments around the country having failed to take the threat of violent, racist and militant groups seriously. This is the end result, the lawyer continued. It's time for our leaders to heed the calls for racial justice and protect those who are calling for change. Black Lives Matter organiser Elizabeth Jarrett outlined that Paddy is always at the front line, assisting First Nations families subjected to police violence, child removal and racism in many other forms, as well as supporting people of all backgrounds suffering injustice. Our community stands with Paddy and his family, the well-known activist made certain. We will not be intimidated by these Nazis, and we will continue to fight side by side against the putrid racism and violence we are subjected to on our lands. A rising tide. New South Wales Police are currently investigating the matter, and it's been lost on no one that this incident has occurred at a time when far-right groups have been emboldened due to their prominent mobilising as part of the freedom movement. Of course, not all participants in the recent anti-lockdown and vaccine mandate rallies have been people who align themselves with the right wing of politics. And Gibson has raised concerns that similar incidents to those he was subjected to might be on the horizon. Sydney criminal lawyers spoke to Paddy Gibson about what occurred at his family home, the reasons why this incident has occurred right now, as well as the actions of government that promote these sorts of far-right actions. UTS Jumbunna Institute researcher Paddy Gibson addresses a Grandmothers Against Removal protest in Sydney, and I thought I'd read out the tag above the photo, even though it's radio and you can't see the photo anyway. Continuing on. Paddy says, 3 neo-Nazis turned up at the family home last Saturday night and bashed on the front door, and they ask him the question, criminal lawyers, can you give us a more detailed account of what happened? And Paddy says, we're at home, me and my partner, on Saturday night. The lucky thing was my children weren't at home. They usually are. There was a loud knock on the door at about 7:30. I walked up and looked through the peephole and saw these beefy white guys with nationalist insignia on the front of their shirts and short-cropped hair. I thought to myself, these are fascists. And there's a language warning. Shit. End of language warning. And this continues. And Paddy says, hello, who's there? One guy says, we're here to see Paddy. I said, why? He said, just tell him to come out here. We want to see him. I started moving away from the door. Then because I didn't know if they were armed or what, and I heard one of them say, are you Paddy? Then they stopped talking and started smashing on the door. My partner and I went to a safe place in the house. It sounded like they were trying to force entry. They continued smashing on the door, and then they smashed on the windows. There was the sound of breaking glass, and we thought they were coming in. I called 000. My partner called a neighbour. We were terrified, and they actually ripped the security screens off. Yeah, they did. We subsequently saw what they did when we went out of the front of the house. They'd had a go at the front door, and they'd managed to rip the security screen off one of the windows, and they also picked up a chair and used that to smash out the window. The banging was all over within minutes, but it was only when we heard our neighbours calling out that we knew we were safe. There was immediate and overwhelming support from our neighbours and others. There is a strong Lebanese community here, and we got support in particular from them. The malicious damage perpetuated upon Gibson's family home. The malicious damage, you've said that you received death threats last year around the time of the Black Lives Matter rallies, but why do you think you've been targeted now? That's guesswork. I've got no particular indication as to why, except for that I'm a prominent anti-racist activist and in the sights of these people. As I said, I've received quite a lot of threats previously, including threats to the house. These threats were really heightened around the Black Lives Matter protests last year. I was getting death threats every day for a while. So I would say I am known to the far right, and they've probably got wind in their sails as they've been welcomed with open arms at these freedom rallies and demonstrations against lockdowns and vaccine mandates. There's been a prominent far-right presence within that movement. I've had more experienced trade unionists and anti-racist activists contact me, telling me that these kinds of tactics were a lot more common in the late 80s. There was a group, National Action, who used to do home visits, but people haven't heard about this particular tactic for quite some time. And then the question is asked by Paul to Paddy. You've just mentioned the far-right link with the freedom movement. There have been numerous visible displays of this presence around the country. So would you say the attack on your house reflects a failure on the part of the political leadership in addressing this? Absolutely. It certainly reflects a failure of political leadership on a range of fronts. Firstly, the racism that we see in such a concentrated and violent form with fascist and openly far-right groupings is really something that's encouraged by government policy. We live in a country where there's absolute systematic racism against Aboriginal people, people of colour and migrants. Aboriginal people are demonised and abused by police and government agencies every day of the week. The response to the Black Lives Movement was disgraceful. We had the police commissioner, Mick Fuller, demonising BLM protesters as being violent and responsible for the spread of the coronavirus last year. We had police attacking our attempts to organise these rallies. We have ongoing police killings of Aboriginal people in police custody. That includes the shooting just a few weeks ago in Sydney, and it's sanctioned really by the government refusal to prosecute killers. The racist political system in Australia and the racist policy settings are what allow the far right to get an audience for their ideas and confidence in them to grow. That's absolutely the case. Nationalism and xenophobia have been encouraged through the coronavirus pandemic. We have seen border closures. It is the go-to measure for governments when they try to appear as though they're acting to contain the virus. The first thing they did with this Omicron variant was shut the borders to southern Africa, even though it was already transmitting in Sydney when they did. Then they banned international students and visa workers from coming to Australia for another couple of weeks, while there's not even Omicron in any of the countries where the students are coming from. This is a knee-jerk, xenophobic response that's designed to show people they're being tough and protective, but all of it encourage racism and nationalism. That's what you get if you have racism at the top. People on the ground are empowered to carry that out in a violent way. Gibson is an ardent anti-racist activist, First Nations rights supporter, and he is a member of socialist group Solidarity. So that's the end of that article, but I read that out because it's really important to have multiple viewpoints, and of course fascism in Australia is a fact. Right-wing xenophobia has come up all over the world, and the pandemic has highlighted that. And so I wanted to read that article for a number of reasons. Also, just to keep the tradition alive that, you know, we do have a listenership in prison. Obviously, 3CR does not have the money to do surveys like rich television stations, or radio stations for that matter. But we are a community radio station, and we try on this particular show, the Doin' Time show, to have people read things out. And traditionally, over many years, there have been, many people who have broadcasted for the Doin' Time show, and not only ex-prisoners, but people who are interested in human rights as well. And people also have varying degrees of literacy skill as well, but it doesn't matter here, because what's important is that the information is read out. It's approximately 4:40, and we're nearing the end of our show, actually, and I'm hoping actually to put some music on and a few announcements now, and really finish early for the show today. And I'll be back for the last time on the 20th of December, and then after that I'll be back on the 31st of January next year. So stay tuned every Monday from 4 to 5 for the Doin' Time show, and I'll say goodbye now, and we'll put some music on, and then at the end we'll be going out with our theme song, Black Fella, White Fella, by the Rumpy Band, and wanted to thank our first guest, Tiffany Overall from Youthlaw, for coming onto the show, and we'll see if we can get Auntie Caroline on at some other time. Thanks so much. Take care. Bye.
You've been listening to a 3CR podcast produced in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.